story of Joseph. There is 5 chapters left to Joseph's story, but this is really kind of the end of his story in general. 47 on is kind of bringing it to a close and explaining, setting up for Exodus and the leaving of Egypt. In 45, we're going to see Joseph finally revealing himself, making himself known to his brothers. In verse 1 it reads, "Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him. He cried, 'Make everyone go out from me.' So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud so that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, 'I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?' But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence." Now, it can get kind of confusing. This word dismayed seems like they're disappointed. The word is also translated to fear or terror. And some of your other translations might actually have those words there. So these guys were actually afraid of Joseph once they found out who he was, which is interesting because they were kind of afraid of him before because of the power that he held and the way they had treated him. They thought that he had something against him. And now that he's revealed himself to be their brother, they seem to be more afraid of him. The obvious supposition is that they were afraid that he was going to take repercussions against them for selling him all those years ago. In verse 4, continuing, it says, "So Joseph said to his brothers, 'Come near to me, please.' And they came near, and he said, 'I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in this land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve you, a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it is not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and the Lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, and your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. There I will provide for you, for there are yet 5 years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have do not come to poverty. And now your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that it is my mouth that speaks to you. You must tell my father of all my honor in Egypt, and of all that you have seen. Hurry and bring my father down here.' Then he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept. And Benjamin wept upon his neck, and he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. After that his brothers talked with them." I really have always enjoyed going through the euphemisms that we use in our society today and talking about whether they're scriptural or not. And this kind of made me think of, it's used by Christians quite a bit, the whole forgive and forget concept. I really have always had a problem with the idea of forgive and forget, because forgetting a wrongdoing really serves no purpose for either person. Right? If you're going to act like you don't even remember it happening, all that does is open the door for it to happen again. We see the same thing in here in 45. We're seeing Joseph forgiving his brothers and telling them not to worry, that God has made all things work out. But he doesn't take away from the guilt that they have for selling him in the first place. He still places that squarely on their shoulders and makes sure that they understand that they're still responsible for that. He just then continues on to explain to them that God has used this for his purpose. So we see in this pretty decently sized paragraph, Joseph illustrating God's providence. Right? The idea that all things are working to God's will. That God has this plan, and that plan is going to come to fruition no matter what. All we can do is decide what part we play in it. And Joseph illustrates this by explaining to them that these are the choices you guys have made in having me brought here. But God has sent me ahead of you in order to preserve your life, in order to carry you through this famine and to provide for you. And it really shows God's providence as a whole, because we see, if we look at the previous chapters, that Jacob's children are starting to intermingle with the people of Canaan. Right? If you recall, Judah has done this. Several of the others at this point have taken wives from the people of Canaan, which they were never supposed to do. Bringing them to Egypt, and we'll talk a little bit more about why this is a little bit later, but bringing them to Egypt separates them from outside influence, allowing them to preserve Israel's namesake and to preserve their bloodline. So it removes them from worldly temptation, and it brings them into a place where God can care for them more abundantly. Verse 16, when the report was heard in Pharaoh's house, Joseph's brothers have come. It pleased Pharaoh and his servants. And the Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this. Load your beast and go back to the land of Canaan. And take your father and your household and come to me, and I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of the land. And you, Joseph, are commanded to say, do this. Take wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father and come. Have no concern for your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. So we see Pharaoh consistently pouring these blessings out on Joseph. Understand that Joseph has now carried them through 2 years of famine by his own intellect. Right? So if it had not been for Joseph, Egypt would have already fallen. And so Pharaoh is willing to give Joseph just about anything he asks for, and Joseph's going to use that. But I wanted to talk about the wagons. We read wagons, and it's kind of not a big deal. But understand that during this time, at this point in history, there is only 2 cultures that are known to have used wagons for transportation. And that's the Scandinavians in Northern Europe and the Egyptians in Northern Africa. There's only 2 cultures in the world at this point in history that have made widespread use of wagons. And so the idea that Pharaoh is going to release these wagons to leave Egypt is a sign of fortune. Right? It places Joseph's family sternly under the protection of Egypt. Because there's no doubt where these wagons came from. When they pulled up and Joseph loads up his family, everyone in the land of Canaan would have known where these wagons were from. And it's going to provide protection for them along their journey. They're not going to have any kind of conflict with anybody, because nobody's willing to do that. Nobody's willing to go up against somebody who has the name of Pharaoh behind them. In verse 21, the son of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them wagons according to the command of Pharaoh, and gave them provisions for the journey. To each and all of them he gave a change of clothes, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 changes of clothes. To his father he sent as follows: 10 donkeys loaded with the good things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and provisions for his father on the journey. Then he sent his brothers away, and as they departed he said to them, do not quarrel on the way. Now, at first, when I was looking at this chapter, it kind of threw me for a loop as to why, if Jacob and all of his family come to Egypt, why send all of these supplies? But we're going to read later that there's 70 people 70 men. That doesn't include the women, and it doesn't include female children, which would be girls. So we can safely assume there's probably 150 people that are going to come into Egypt. So you can imagine what a task that would have been to get them all ready for this journey, to pack up everything you have and load it up and carry it into Egypt. This was not an overnight thing. And so these provisions were sent back with them in order to supply them both with the time it would take them to get ready to move and for the trip itself. I think that there's something to be said for Joseph's instruction to not quarrel on the way. There's both the idea that they would fight amongst themselves, which they've shown that they have a penchant for doing. As soon as somebody with authority is not around them, they tend to do a lot of infighting. But I think a lot of it is also not quarreling with the people that they meet on the road, which would have been tempting because they're not given a station that they've never been able to experience before. And they've been put into this position where they would have been a very likely target for raiders, brigands, thieves, anyone along that road that would have been trying to make a quick buck. They would have been easy targets. And he's warning them to remain in their place, to not start fights with people. And I think that's telling because Joseph really doesn't know a lot about their character at this point in their lives. Right? He's had a couple of experiences with them as they come to buy grain, but really that's about it. So the last thing he knew about their personality was their ability to throw their own brothers into pits and to fight amongst themselves on whether they should kill their brother or sell him. So it stands to reason that these warnings from Joseph is more pertaining to don't be the people that you have been. In verse 25, it says, So they went up out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to their father Jacob. And they told him, Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt. And his heart became numb, for he did not believe them. But when they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And Israel said, It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. I think it's really a cool idea to think about where Jacob sits in all of this. And how hard this event must have been for him. You have a man who lost a son, or believed that he lost his son to an animal attack, has gone through all the stages of grief, and believed this son to be dead for over 20 years. And then all of a sudden he finds out that this son is alive and is going to provide for him. He would be the same today as if you had a 17-year-old son that you believed was murdered, and then 22 years later found out that he's the vice president of the United States. That's what we're looking at. That's the position Jacob's in. Joseph is not only alive, but he's the second most powerful person in all of Egypt. Now, understanding the mentality of people during this time, yes, it would have been this amazing thing to have a son back from the dead, but Jacob's primary responsibility is to provide for these 150 or so people. As the patriarch of Israel, that is his responsibility. And he is in a position where he can't do that. So we also imagine a lot of relief on Jacob's part, understanding that while he can't do this thing, while he can't make sure that his family is kept safe and fed during this famine, his son that he thought was dead is now all of a sudden in a position to provide them with blessings that no one else will ever get to enjoy during this time period. In fact, they become blessed over even the Egyptians themselves. That's why Pharaoh set up this land of Goshen. Now, the Egyptians would have been fine getting rid of this. understand the land of Goshen is mostly field lands, grasslands, hills, stuff that really didn't have much of a place for the Egyptians. It didn't really speak to their culture to utilize this land. Right? They were industrious. They lived in cities. You had farmers, you had agriculture, but most of that was crop. In fact, Egypt's economy, most of their meats were imported from other people. From traders that were traveling. Egypt really didn't have very many butchers even. So when they brought in animals, there was only a handful of people that could even prepare the meat. They saw it as beneath themselves to commit these acts. And so this land of Goshen was widely unused by the Egyptians. But from Israel's perspective, it was the perfect place. They gave them wide open fields. They gave them a buffer between them and the Egyptians. But they were well within Egypt's borders, which gave them protection from everybody else. It left them in a peaceful state where they could grow and gain their wealth, to grow both their numbers of people as well as their numbers of their flocks. And we'll see over the next chapter or so that Israel flourishes under these conditions. Like I said, we're talking about God's divine providence through this story. God has already promised Abraham the land of Canaan. Now, if you recall, Abraham at one time also left that land and came to Egypt during a famine and was condemned for it. So it's interesting to note that during this time, God actually encourages Jacob to go down to the land of Egypt. And they're going to stay there for quite a period of time. And in the grand overarching story, this stay in Egypt will provide the cornerstone for Israel's faith for centuries. So much so that the Jewish people today still celebrate and remember their leaving Egypt. So I imagine that their having to escape Egypt was a plan for God in order to provide them with a point of faith. But in order to do this story must take place. They have to have been brought into Egypt. Without which, like I said, they would have stayed in the land of Canaan, and then probably would have died out as a people due from the intermingling that was taking place at this point. I look at Jacob and where he's at this point in the story. And it's really interesting because when you look at the other patriarchs up until now, they have been the forefront of their family. They've made the decisions. They've been the savior of their families. They've been the providers for their families. Jacob really doesn't come across that way for most of Joseph's story. Even before Joseph reintroduces himself to them, Jacob seems to be a backseat character. His brothers taking the forefront. And in fact, his brothers were doing most of the work. If you go back and look at the previous chapters, his brothers have been doing most of the work to provide for the family. They've been taking care of the flocks. They've been making the trades. They've been speaking on behalf of the family. Jacob really has just been kind of quiet throughout all this. And I say that's interesting because Joseph will reaffirm that position and mentality and then continue it by taking over as the provider for Israel. I also want to point out this last line this last line in the chapter. In verse 28 it says, "And Israel said, 'It is enough.'" I think that's interesting because if you remember priorly when Jacob thought that Joseph had died, Jacob kind of took the mentality of, the world's a horrible place and everyone in it is against me and God is against me. All of these things are bad and they're happening to me and there's nothing I can do about it. We see Jacob really kind of losing faith at that point in his story. And so I think it's interesting that without ever having seen Joseph, just hearing the words that Joseph has given his brothers to say to him, suddenly that faith comes out. He says, it is enough. I think it's interesting because I think that we could do with that mentality a lot in our own lives. See, God blesses us all the time. Sometimes small, sometimes big. Sometimes those blessings are subtle and we barely even catch them. And sometimes those blessings are so obvious that you can't help but to dwell on them. But I think so often as Christians we become enamored with being God's chosen people that we think the blessings should just rain down upon us right for the picking. And we get so caught up in wanting more than what we have. We think that God should give us blessing after blessing, and after He gives us those blessings, we still expect Him to give us more. At some point as Christians, we've got to look at what God has given us and acknowledge that it's enough. You know, I think everyone in here has heard me complain about my job, just as I've heard everyone in this room complain about their job. It's like, well, maybe not Ken on this group, but. And while, yes, I would love a perfect job where I like all the people I work with, where I enjoy the work itself, and everything lines up, and I'm paid way more than I actually deserve, I would love a job like that. But at some point, I have to look at it and say, it is enough that I have a job. At some point, I've got to decide that it is enough that I am in a better position than many other people. For those who in the room that have not yet been married, you will find that when you do, marriage is far from perfect, ever. There's a lot of struggles. There's a lot of things that you wish could be better than they are, or you wish were different. You're going to struggle to see eye to eye. You're going to struggle to be on the same page on a lot of different issues, and there are some issues you're never going to be on the same page. And there's a lot of times where you find yourself wishing that it could be more perfect, where these struggles weren't in your way. But at some point, you've got to look at your partner and say, it is enough that I have found this. It is enough that I have found love in a loveless world. It's enough that I have somebody that will stand with me through this life. It's enough that I have something that a great many people will never get to enjoy. There are so many things in our lives where we wish it was better than what it is. There's so many times in our lives where we see the blessings that we're given and we decide that they weren't as good as we wanted them to be. I have never said this during our time dealing with Jacob. This is the only time I will say this pertaining to Jacob. But in this one instance, I think that we as Christians can afford to be a little bit more like him. We want signs from God, proof that He exists and that we matter to Him. We want God to come down and fight our battles for us and make our decisions for us so that we don't have to take responsibility for them. We want God to lift us up above the people who don't believe in Him. At some point, we've got to decide that it is enough that he sent his son to die for us. And more than that, it's more than enough. It's more than he was ever obligated to do. You see, Jacob counted on his sons to take care of him and take care of the family and to really do his job for him. Jacob really doesn't, throughout Joseph's story, we see Jacob not really taking any of the weight upon his own shoulders to do the things that he should have been doing. And in fact, when bad things happen, he's shown a penchant for blaming his sons and taking no responsibility for himself. See, God didn't do that. When we failed him, we abandoned him. God made that right. God sent a blessing beyond any blessing that we could have ever hoped for or dreamed of. We need to get back to a state in our own spiritual walks where we can look at that and say it is enough. We don't ask God to feed us. We don't ask God to give us things hand over fist and to treat us like we're some royal, lavish brats. But instead acknowledging what God has already done is more than we ever deserved. I think when we start looking at things from that perspective, when we start taking that mentality, I think that we'll find we seem to be a lot more satisfied with what we have in life. Because you see, we're not owed anything. We like to say that to people. You see, the people who live life the way we don't think they should live it, we like to say, well, they think that life owes them something. And we like to tell other people, I don't think that anyone owes me anything. But yet we still live like God owes us. You understand that dividing life, the very second you were born, God gave you more than he ever owed you. And everything that comes after that is just us being more in debt to him. It's not a miracle that God gives us more blessings than we deserve. It's not a miracle that we are so shallow that we often expect more blessings than we have. What is a miracle is no matter how in debt we get to God, he never actually asks us to pay. At no point will God tell you that your bill is due. We close out Bible study. I know it's been a shorter one today, but I think that this chapter really is kind of tying together the changes in the characters that we've been reading about. And the mentality of the brothers, their ability to work with one another, and their ability to overlook favoritism, which they haven't been able to do in the past. It shows a change in Joseph from being that stuck-up punk of a kid that we saw early in this story to being somebody who cares about nothing other than doing God's will and doing the right thing. And we even see this change in Jacob. From the person who decided that God owed him something because of all these bad things that happened to him, to hearing some kind of blessing that God has given and saying it is enough. I hope as you guys continue your week that you will find those blessings in your life